It all started on a Friday night. I was exhausted. The whole week had been a rush, and the last thing I wanted was to stay home listening to the noise of traffic and neighbors shouting. So, I decided to break the routine and booked an Airbnb in Salt Lake City, farther from the city. I just wanted silence, a bit of peace. Nothing fancy. I arrived as it was getting dark. The house looked exactly like the photos, small, a bit old, but cozy. It had that classic American house style, with a front porch and wide windows. The place was on a dead-end street, surrounded by tall trees. Perfect for someone looking for peace and quiet, or at least that's what I thought. I picked up the key from the box outside, as the host had instructed, and went inside. As soon as I closed the door behind me, that heavy silence hit. You know how sometimes the silence is so loud it feels like you're hearing something? That's how it was. I ignored that feeling and went to explore the place. Everything seemed normal, a bit impersonal, but tidy. The smell was weird, a mix of mildew and old wood. Nothing scary, but enough to make me uncomfortable. After dropping my stuff in the bedroom, I went to the kitchen and made a coffee. The idea was to sit on the couch, watch something on TV and relax, but a strange anxiety began creeping in. Maybe it was the fact that I was alone in an unfamiliar place. But then I thought, cut it out, you're overthinking. The problem was that the house started giving me an odd feeling. You know that sense that something's wrong, but you can't put your finger on it. Every room I entered, it felt like someone was watching me, but at the same time, it was just me there. Everything was quiet, everything seemed under control. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. By around 11 at night, I decided to go to bed. First, I checked all the doors and windows. I locked everything, double locking each door just to be sure. I went back to the bedroom and threw myself onto the bed. But the more I tried to relax, the more tense I became. Every creak of the wood, every groan of the house seemed louder. I was sure it was just the aging place, but at the same time, something inside me told me to stay alert. I was almost dozing off when I heard a clear, distinct sound click. That noise of a doorknob being turned slowly. I opened my eyes in shock, and my heart started pounding. I got out of bed with my body frozen, trying not to make a sound. I walked quietly to the bedroom door to peek out. When I reached the living room, I saw something that made me freeze immediately. The front door was ajar. I had locked that damn door. I was absolutely sure of it. How was it open now? I stood there, frozen, trying to process what was happening. It couldn't have been the wind. What if someone had come in? I started looking around, trying to notice any movement, any shadow. But the house was quiet, empty, just as I had left it. But the feeling that I wasn't alone was even stronger now. I closed the door, locking it firmly, as if that would protect me from something. But at that moment, reality hit. I was isolated, in the middle of nowhere, and if someone was really around, I was screwed. Trying not to lose it, I went back to the bedroom and locked the door. I threw myself onto the bed, but sleep was long gone. All I could hear was my heart pounding and my eyes wide open, trying to catch any other noise in the house. That's when it started. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, in the hallway. The floor creaked slowly, as if someone was walking carefully, trying not to be noticed. My whole body froze. Every muscle was tense, and adrenaline was racing through my veins. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't muster the courage to get up, and at the same time, I couldn't just sit there waiting for the worst. Around 3 in the morning, the footsteps returned. This time, they were faster, more restless. I didn't know if I was imagining things or if the situation had really escalated. I tried to stay calm, but it was impossible not to feel paralyzed by fear. I wondered if I should call the police, but I kept thinking, what if I'm wrong? What if it's nothing? The doubt consumed me. But then, the thought of someone being inside, walking around and messing with things, was enough to make me decide. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking. Calling the police was the only thing that made sense at that moment. The phone barely moved in my hand from the tension. After making the call, I explained the situation as best I could, trying not to sound like a complete lunatic. While waiting, I tried to listen for any signs of activity. The sound of footsteps had stopped, which only increased my paranoia. The feeling of being watched came back strongly. Every shadow, every dark corner seemed to hide something. I looked around, trying to make the minutes pass faster. The fear that the police would arrive and find nothing was palpable. They might think I was delusional, that my mind was playing tricks on me. And if they thought I was exaggerating, what would I do then? Finally, the siren lights illuminated the front of the house. The police entered and did a thorough search. I followed them, nervous, explaining everything again, but it felt like my words were coming out in a whirlwind. They looked for any signs of forced entry, anything out of place. But apparently, everything was just as I had left it. As they checked the house, I felt more and more ridiculous. Everything seemed too calm now, almost unreal. One of the officers made a comment about how sometimes the mind can play tricks on us in stressful situations. Trying to avoid their curious gazes, I looked at the floor, trying not to think about how stupid I must have looked. The inspection ended with nothing found. There were no signs of forced entry, or anything suggesting someone had broken into the house. They told me to stay alert and keep the doors locked. The kind of advice you already know, but it feels empty when you're so shaken up. When the police left, I was in a state of shock. The silence of the house was deafening, and now I was alone, with the feeling that danger could come back at any moment. What was worse was that I couldn't understand what had happened. There was no logical explanation. The door I had locked was open, and I was sure I had heard footsteps. But the police found nothing. I spent the rest of the night in the kitchen, sitting at the table, the only light coming from the lamp I left on. Fatigue and fear were mixed together, and I couldn't stop thinking about how I was going to get out of that situation. I couldn't sleep, couldn't relax. Every sound, every movement made me jump. I was completely beside myself. When the day finally came, I knew I couldn't stay another minute in that place. The sense of insecurity and the doubt about what really happened consumed me. Canceling the rest of my stay, I packed my things quickly. I just wanted to leave, go back to the comfort of my home, and forget about that horrible night. I left the Airbnb, without looking back. This experience left me with an unsettling feeling that I'll never be able to shake off. I had no answers, just a story to tell and a fear that will never leave me. And the worst part? Knowing that what happened could be very real, more than any horror story you've ever heard. I was exhausted, needed to disappear from the world for a few days. Found this house on Airbnb, in a tiny town in North Carolina, perfect to unplug from everything. But since I got there, the place gave me a weird vibe. You know that feeling when you walk into a place and the air just feels heavy? I can't explain it, but it was like that. I looked around. The house was kinda cute, a bit old, surrounded by tall trees. Perfect for someone looking for peace, but with that horror movie touch, if you know what I mean. I dropped my stuff in the bedroom, took a shower, and went to the living room. The silence inside was so intense I could hear the wind outside. I grabbed a glass of wine, turned on the TV just to have some background noise. I was enjoying the solitude, thinking it was going to be the best decision of the year. But deep down, there was this nagging feeling that something was off. I tried to ignore it, focus on resting, but my brain wouldn't let me. That's when, out of nowhere, I heard the sound of tires on gravel. A car stopped right in front of the house. Who the hell could that be? I thought. It was a remote place. I wasn't expecting anyone. I got up slowly, peeked through the curtain, and saw two guys getting out of a car that looked like it came straight out of the 90s. I started to feel a knot in my stomach. They were arguing with each other, pointing at the house and their phones as if they were checking something. I swear my instinct was to yell that they were in the wrong place and to tell them to leave, but something stopped me. I just kept watching, trying to figure out what was going on. One of the guys, taller and with a mean look, came straight toward my door and knocked. It wasn't a polite knock, it was a heavy thud, like he was in a hurry. My heart started racing. I peeked out the window again and saw he was getting impatient, looking pretty pissed off. I wasn't going to open the door, obviously. I just said from inside, "What do you want?" Then he said they also rented the house on Airbnb and had a reservation for that night. My mind went into a spin. Also? I said I had a confirmed reservation and wasn't going to open the door. That's when the second guy, shorter and with a rat-like face, stepped up. He came with a voice full of anger, saying I was causing trouble, that the house was theirs, and I needed to open the door so we could sort it out. Man, this made no sense. I was alone, in the middle of nowhere, and now two strangers were trying to get in. My survival instinct kicked in. I locked the door properly, checked all the windows, and kept an eye on them through the curtain. The scariest part was that they didn't leave. They stayed whispering to each other, walking around the house, like they were plotting something. That's when I really started to get scared. The wind outside got stronger, and the creaking of the trees seemed amplified. With every second, my heart raced faster. I was locked in, but they were out there, getting more and more frustrated. The silence was broken when one of them, with a muffled voice, said he was going to get the tool from the car. I was there, frozen, trying not to make a sound, even with my breathing, while they circled the house like predators. There was no doubt that Airbnb reservation talk was a load of crap. They were testing me, seeing if I would give in to fear or make a mistake. And I knew any slip-up could land me in a much worse situation. The tension inside the house was suffocating, like the air was getting denser with every passing minute. Then I heard heavy footsteps on the porch again. But this time, the knocking had changed. It wasn't that frantic banging anymore. It was slow, rhythmic, like they had all the time in the world. The kind of knock that shows they were in control. My heart was nearly in my throat. There was nowhere to run. Cell phone signal was almost non-existent, and there was no one around to help. It was just me, against two guys who clearly had a plan. The first guy's voice came through the door again, but this time without the politeness. He was pissed, trying to provoke me. He said something like, "It'll be easier if you just open up." I stayed silent, trying to think of a way out of this mess. But what really terrified me was when the other guy, who had gone to get the tool, came back. All I could see through the side window was a shadow of him holding something heavy. A crowbar. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a chat or a dispute about a supposed reservation anymore. Now they were gearing up to break in. The knocking on the door got more aggressive, like they were about to start forcing their way in. At that moment, I was sure if they got inside, things were going to take a very, very bad turn. I needed to think fast. My mind was racing. What if I tried to leave through the back door? What if I tried to hide somewhere in the house? But they must have figured out the size of the house just from walking around. There wasn't much room to maneuver. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. For a few seconds, all I heard was the wind blowing and the rustling of the trees outside. It was such a dense silence, it felt like even time had stopped. Then I heard whispers outside, the two of them mumbling something I couldn't make out. When I peeked through the curtain, they were no longer in sight. That freaked me out even more. Where the hell had they gone? My fear was that they were trying to catch me off guard, maybe looking for another way into the house. Every sound outside seemed amplified. Any crack, any rustle, made me imagine the worst. I hid behind a piece of furniture, clutching my phone tightly, trying to find a weak signal to call for help. But the damn thing just showed that empty bar. No signal. No escape. Then I heard the sound I feared the most. A heavy creaking, coming from the back of the house. Someone was fiddling with the back door handle. I almost let out a scream but managed to hold it in. They were trying to get in from another side. I could hear the creaking intensify, as if they were forcing the door. Then, silence again. My heart pounded so hard I swear they must have heard it. The pressure inside me was at its limit. And then, out of nowhere, I heard the sound of glass shattering. My body froze. I couldn't see where it was coming from, but I knew they were breaking through. The situation had reached a point where I couldn't just wait anymore. I had to act, but I had no idea what to do. I felt cornered, like a rat in a maze, with the predators getting closer and closer. It was just any Thursday, and I was sprawled on the couch, enjoying my free time after a hectic day. I had already opened a beer and was flipping through channels, not really caring about what was on. You know that end of the night feeling where you just want to relax and forget the world? That was exactly it. Then my phone buzzed. I looked at the screen and saw an unknown number. Normally, I would have ignored it, but since I had a few properties listed on Airbnb, I answered, grumbling, thinking it might be a guest with a stupid question or, at most, a complaint. I was wrong. The voice on the other end was a guy who spoke quickly and straight to the point. "The water at the house stopped working," he said, with that impatient tone but without sounding desperate. It was the kind of voice that makes you pay attention but also makes you wary. I asked if he had checked the pipes, tried resetting the heater, things like that. The guy didn't hesitate, just said he didn't know what to do and needed me to come over to fix it. Now, I gotta tell you, something about that call gave me a weird feeling. I had been renting out the house for a while and rarely had problems like this. The house was in a secluded neighborhood, one of those places where the streets are empty at night, and I knew going there wouldn't be the smartest move at that hour. But since I hated leaving problems unresolved, I grabbed the keys and left home, already in a bad mood but determined to sort it out quickly. When I arrived in the neighborhood, the silence was almost deafening. Everything was dark, no sign of life in the other houses. Only the lights at my property were on, and I could see shadows moving through the closed curtains. The place already felt off before I even knocked on the door. And when I did, it took forever. Man, it took forever. The sense of discomfort just kept growing. Finally, the door opened, and the guy who greeted me gave me the creeps just by looking at him. He was probably in his early 40s, with thinning hair and a smile that seemed completely out of place, like he was forcing friendliness. His old, worn-out shirt only added to the bizarre vibe. He didn't seem like the kind of guy I'd expect to rent a house through Airbnb, and that just made my feeling that something was very wrong even worse. He gestured for me to come in, and I headed straight to the kitchen. The faucet was indeed not working, but at that point, my concern was much more about what was going on than about a plumbing issue. I asked if there was anyone else in the house, and he casually mentioned that 2 of his friends were in the basement. That sent a chill down my spine. Who, at the dead of night, hangs out in a dark, stuffy basement? The guy noticed I was tense and insisted on taking me down there to fix the problem. I went down the stairs with him, and as soon as my feet hit the basement floor, the situation got much darker. The place was poorly lit, with that musty smell old basements have. And there, sitting on an old couch, were 2 guys who looked like they walked out of an 80s mob movie. One was completely fixated on a turned-off TV, which was already strange in itself, while the other looked impatient, tapping his foot on the floor repeatedly. It was at that moment I saw something that made me freeze. The impatient guy had a gun visible on his hip. Nothing illegal, but the way he kept his hand near it, like he was ready for anything, made me totally paranoid. You know that kind of fear that starts in your stomach and rises to your throat? That's exactly how I felt. There, alone in the basement with 3 strangers, a gun in sight, and a silence that was suffocating. But I couldn't show panic. I started pretending I was focused on the problem, fiddling with the pipes as if I really knew what I was doing, while my mind raced, trying to figure out what these guys were up to. The tension was so palpable I could feel sweat running down my back. Every time I looked up, the 3 of them were silently watching me, like they were waiting for something. I just wanted to get out of there. I made up an excuse that the problem was bigger than I expected and that I'd need to call a plumber the next day. To my surprise, the guy who had answered didn't protest at all. He just nodded with that weird smile and escorted me back to the door, where I finally felt an absurd relief stepping outside the house. The drive back to the car seemed endless. As soon as I got in, I sped away as fast as I could and only really breathed once I was a good few blocks away. That night I knew I would never rent that house again. Some things aren't worth the risk, and that experience taught me that the hard way. I deactivated the Airbnb listing right then and there. I knew I had barely escaped, but what they really wanted, I'll never know. And honestly, I'd rather not find out.